At first, the sound was not loud. It was low, heavy, and close to the ground. Then the people of Mortain understood. Tanks were coming in the dark. On August 7th, 1944, before the sun rose over Normandy, German armor moved toward the small French town like a steel storm. If you enjoy true stories from World War II, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because this forgotten stand shows how one road, one hill, and one lone tank could change the fate of an army. Only one day before, Mortain had looked almost peaceful. The town sat in the hills of Normandy, with old stone streets, quiet houses, and green fields around it. The people had lived under German occupation for years. Army, and below that watchtower the lone Sherman's meaning became clearer. They had learned to keep their voices low, their windows closed, and their hopes hidden. Then, in early August 1944, American troops arrived, and for a short time it felt like life was coming back. On August 3rd, 1944, the U.S. 1st Infantry Division entered Mortain. For many families this seemed like a new beginning. Women stood near doors. Children watched from behind walls. Men who had said little for years now looked at the road with wet eyes. The war was not over, but the Germans had been pushed back. The Americans were moving fast after Operation Cobra, the great breakout that began on July 25, 1944. The road to Avranches was open. General George Patton's Third Army was pouring into France. It looked as if the German army in Normandy was losing control. But far away from the smiling faces in Mortain, a secret fight was happening in command rooms. Adolf Hitler could not accept the truth. His armies were weak, tired, and low on fuel. His generals wanted to pull back and save what they could. Hitler wanted the opposite. He ordered a counterattack. Its name was Operation Budge. Its goal was simple and desperate: strike west through Mortain, reach Avranches, cut the American corridor, and trap Patton's forces in Brittany. This was the secret behind the calm. Mortain was not only a town, it was a gate. If the Germans took it and broke through, thousands of Allied soldiers could be cut off. The men on Hill 314 ran low on food. The whole victory in Normandy could slow down or even turn into disaster. That is why the archives still return to Mortain. On a map, it was a small place. In the war, it became a knife pointed at the heart of the Allied breakout. On August 6th, the U.S. 30th Infantry Division, known as Old Hickory, moved into the Mortain area. Many of these men came from National Guard routes in Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. They had already fought hard in Normandy. They were not fresh. They were tired, dusty, and still carrying the shock of the hedgerow battles. Yet they were ordered to take over positions from the 1st Infantry Division near Mortain. The move felt strange. Some soldiers passed civilians who smiled, waved, and offered drinks. The sun was warm. The roads looked alive again. For a young American soldier, it could almost feel like the war was moving away. Some of them may have thought about home, about a wife, a mother, a father, or a girl who was waiting for a letter. A tank crew inside a Sherman could look out at the French hills and dream just for a moment that the worst was behind them. But the peaceful picture was false. It was a calm before a trap closed. The 30th Division had little time to dig in. The positions they inherited were not ready for a major armored assault. The men were spread across roads, ridges, farms, and wooded ground. Hill 314 rose east of Mortain, giving a view over the roads below. Whoever held that hill could see movement around the town. That made it priceless. It also made it a target. In the darkness after midnight, the first signs came. German infantry moved through woods and roads. Tanks rolled forward with engines growling. The main German force included powerful panzer units, with the 2nd SS Panzer Division pushing toward Mortain and Hill 314. The plan depended on speed, surprise, and fear. If the Americans broke, the road west could open. But one part of the story was hidden from the Germans. Allied codebreakers had learned that a large attack was coming. Warnings moved through high command. Still, war is never clean. A warning on paper does not always reach every foxhole in time. Many men at Mortain were hit before they fully understood the size of the danger. Around 1:25 in the morning on August 7th, firing began near the 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry Regiment. Soon German tanks and infantry were moving around Mortain. Roadblocks were attacked. American positions were cut. Men who had only just arrived were suddenly fighting in darkness against armor they could barely see. Some units were overrun. Some were split apart. Some men disappeared into German prisoner lines. Others climbed, crawled, and fought back through smoke and noise. On Hill 314, American soldiers were surrounded. About 700 men were trapped there under Captain Reynolds C. Erickson. They had little food, little water, and no easy way out. Yet they also had one great gift. From the hill, forward observers could see German roads below and call artillery fire. Down near the roads and hedgerows, the fight became even more brutal. German tanks were not only machines. In the dark, they were terror. Their tracks crushed roads and gardens. Their guns flashed like lightning. Their armor looked almost impossible to stop. The Americans had bazookas, anti-tank guns, tank destroyers, artillery, and Shermans from supporting tank units such as the 743rd Tank Battalion. But the ground was hard for armor. The hedgerows blocked vision. Every bend could hide a gun. Every lane could become a grave. This is where the story of the lone tank begins to matter. The archives do not show a simple legend where one tank wins the Battle of Mortain alone. Real war is never that clean. But records do show that at Mortain, single weapons, single crews, and single positions often held back forces much larger than themselves. One Sherman in a hedge line, one anti-tank gun at a roadblock, one observer on Hill 314, one radio still working through the noise. Each piece mattered. Each one bought minutes. And in Mortain, minutes were as valuable as blood. The lone Sherman at the center of this story was not the biggest tank on the battlefield. It was not a Panther. It was not a Tiger. It was an American M4 Sherman, the workhorse tank of the U.S. It had flaws. Its armor was not as thick as many German tanks. Its main gun could struggle against heavy German armor from the front. Yet it was fast, reliable, and deadly when handled by a brave crew in close country. In the narrow lanes around Mortain, a Sherman could become more than a tank. It could become a locked door. As German armor pushed forward, one American tank position helped slow the enemy near a key line of movement. Its crew faced the kind of fear no training could remove. They knew that one direct hit could turn their steel home into fire. They knew German tanks could kill them before they could even see the full shape of the enemy. Still they stayed. That is the shock behind the title. The reason archives confirm this lone tank held the line is not because it destroyed everything in front of it. It is because it refused to move at the moment movement would have opened the road. It stood in a place where the enemy needed space. That is the loop that keeps bringing historians back to the same question. It fired. It blocked. It forced hesitation. It made a fast attack become a slow fight. And while that lone tank held its ground, the men on Hill 314 were watching the roads below, calling down artillery, and turning German movement into chaos. By daylight on August 7th, Mortain no longer looked like a town being freed. It looked like a town being swallowed. German forces had entered parts of Mortain. Smoke rose from streets. Wounded men waited for help that could not easily reach them. Hill 314 was cut off. American units tried to understand where the front line was, but in many places there was no clean front line at all. The enemy was north, south, east, and west. This is why Mortain became so frightening. The Germans did not attack like a small patrol. Infantry held hills and lanes. They came with armor, infantry, and a clear order from the top. Hitler wanted advances. He wanted the American breakout cut. He wanted to turn the joy of liberation into panic. His commanders knew the risk. Some understood that the German army in Normandy was already in danger of being trapped. But Hitler demanded the attack, and so the panzer columns moved into the hills. The Americans at Mortain were caught between two truths. The hill held because surrounded men refused to surrender. The first truth was terrible. They were outnumbered in key places, surprised in the dark and facing strong German armor. It was a battle of staying power. The second truth was powerful. If they held long enough, the German plan could fail. That is why a single Sherman mattered. A tank in a movie can look like a monster. A tank in real life is different. It is loud, hot, cramped, and blind in many directions. The crew must trust each other with everything. Wounded men lay in pain while others kept firing. The commander searches for danger. The gunner waits for a target. The loader lifts heavy rounds again and again. The driver listens for orders while the ground shakes. The bow gunner watches the front and feels every impact through the hull. Inside there is no room for drama. There is only work, fear, heat, smoke, and the next second. Near Mortain, the crew of a lone Sherman had to face German tanks and infantry in close ground. The hedgerows of Normandy were not open desert. They were thick banks of earth, roots, bush, and trees. They made small fields into little forts. A tank could be hidden until it fired. A gun could wait behind a bend. A man with a Panzerfaust could be close enough to kill before the tank crew knew he was there. For German armor, these roads were also dangerous. A Panther or Panzer could not simply race forward if a Sherman, an anti-tank gun, or a bazooka team covered the lane. The road had to be cleared. That took time. This is where the emotional heart of the story grows stronger. Time allowed artillery to fall. Time allowed air support to arrive. Time allowed American reserves to move. The lone Sherman did not need to destroy an army. It only needed to deny speed. Archives and unit histories make this point clear again and again. Mortain was won by delay, not by one grand charge. A German plan built on speed was forced to crawl. Roadblocks stopped vehicles. Tank destroyers fired from hard positions. Artillery observers on Hill 314 brought down fire on roads that the enemy had to use. Allied aircraft later struck German columns when the weather cleared. Every delay tied into another delay, like links in a chain. But inside that chain, the lone tank becomes unforgettable because it shows the human center of the battle. Imagine the crew looking through their narrow sights. They cannot see the whole battle. They do not know that historians will later study this ground. Bartz and Lieutenant Robert L. They do not know that the 30th Division will one day be honored for its stand. They know only what is in front of them. A road, a hedge, smoke, the sound of engines, the crack of shells, the order to hold. The German tanks come closer. The Sherman fires. The first shot may not end the threat. The loader works again. Another round goes in. The gunner adjusts. The commander calls the target. The machine guns speak. Around them, American infantry fight from fields and ditches. In some areas, men fought cut off. The Sherman is not alone in the larger battle, but in that one place, at that one moment, it is the hard center of the line. One German tank is hit. The enemy advance slows. Men who expected to roll forward now have to stop, look, and answer. That pause is small on a clock, but huge in war. A fast armored attack depends on shock. When shock breaks, courage has room to breathe. On Hill 314, the surrounded Americans could see enemy movement below. Lieutenant Charles A. Weiss artillery observers with the 230th Field Artillery Battalion became vital to the defense. Their radios helped call fire onto German units. When the Germans tried to move, shells came down. When they tried to gather, shells broke them apart. The hill was hungry, thirsty, and wounded, but it still had eyes. This created a cruel problem for the Germans. They had taken parts of Mortain, but they had not silenced Hill 314. They had pushed into American lines, but they had not broken the American will. They had tanks, but they did not have control. The lone Sherman and the other road defenders were the teeth at ground level. Hill 314 was the eye above them. Artillery was the hammer. That artillery did more than kill vehicles. Still, the price was terrible. They held. Water became rare. Ammunition had to be saved and counted. Medical supplies were not enough. Attempts to drop supplies from the air were difficult because the hill was small and wooded. Some supplies fell into German hands. In one of the most unusual acts of the battle, American artillery crews fired shell containers packed with supplies toward the surrounded men. It was dangerous and strange, but it showed how desperate the situation had become. Below the hill, the fighting around Mortain and nearby roadblocks stayed savage. The 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion with towed guns and half-tracks fought under extreme pressure. The 120th Infantry, the 117th Infantry, and other Old Hickory units were pulled into a struggle that had no clean shape. In others, small groups held because there was no one else behind them. This is the hidden truth of Mortain. It was not only one battle. It was many small last stands happening at the same time. A roadblock near Hill 314 could stop vehicles. A Sherman near a hedgerow could make German armor pause. A bazooka team could make a panzer crew nervous. A radio operator could keep a hill alive. A captain could hold men together when the map no longer made sense. All these small acts built one large wall. The Germans had expected surprise to carry them forward. Instead, surprise became confusion. The Americans were hurt, but they did not collapse. The German columns found that every road cost time. Every hill had eyes. Every lane could hide a gun. By midday on August 7th, the weather improved, and Allied aircraft began attacking German vehicles and positions. The sky, which had been quiet under fog and darkness, became dangerous for the attackers. But the men on the ground could not simply wait for planes. The fight did not stop at noon. German attacks came again. The pressure returned at night. The men on Hill 314 were still surrounded. The Sherman crews and infantry still faced danger. The enemy was still close. The battle was not yet won. The lone tank had helped hold the line, but now the question became larger. Could the whole line survive long enough for help to arrive? The answer would take 5 days of hunger, smoke, and fear. From August 7th to August 12th, 1944, Mortain became a test of endurance. The German attack had not reached Evrenches. The road to Patton's forces had not been cut, but the danger was still real. The men trapped on Hill 314 could hear the enemy around them. The soldiers at roadblocks could feel the next attack before it came. The tank crews knew their machines could be hit at any moment. This was no longer a battle of clean plans. The lone Sherman's stand matters because it shows what happened across the whole Mortain front. The German plan needed open roads. The Americans denied those roads. Sometimes they denied them with artillery, sometimes with aircraft, sometimes with tank destroyers, sometimes with infantry, and sometimes with one tank crew that had no choice except to stay in place and make the enemy pay for every yard. In simple words, Mortain proves that a line is not held by steel alone. It is held by people who decide not to run. The German commanders had been pulled into a dangerous gamble. By attacking west toward Evrenches, they sent armored forces deeper into a trap. The Allies were already breaking out of Normandy. Canadian and British forces were pressing from the north. American forces were moving from the west and south. The more the Germans pushed at Mortain, the more they risked being caught later near Falaise. That is the great twist of the battle. Hitler wanted Operation Luttich to save the German army in Normandy. Instead, it helped weaken it further. The attack used tanks, fuel, and men that Germany could not easily replace. The delay at Mortain gave the Allies more time. It helped keep the American corridor open. It helped the wider movement that would soon lead to the Falaise pocket, where large parts of the German army in Normandy were trapped. But for the men in the foxholes, none of that future was clear. They were not thinking about grand strategy. They were thinking about the next shell, the next order, the next wounded friend. On Hill 314, Captain Reynold Erikson and the trapped defenders continued hold. Their position was hit again and again. German troops tried to break them. Hunger and thirst became enemies, too. Some men searched for food in fields. Some shared what little they had. The wounded suffered. The radios were life itself, because as long as the observers could call artillery, the hill could still fight. When the enemy moved on roads below, American shells answered. It broke timing. It broke groups apart. It made German officers unsure. It turned movement into risk. Even when the defenders on the hill were surrounded, they were still shaping the battlefield. This is why Hill 314 is so important. It was not just high ground. It was a vulnerable machine in a deadly place, crewed by men who knew the odds were bad. It was a living watchtower. The tank was part of a larger truth. At Mortain, the Americans held by making every German move expensive. One tank could not stop Operation Barbarossa alone. But one tank could stop one road. One road could slow one column. One column slowed could miss its time. And when a plan depends on speed, delay is defeat. Why did the German attack fail? Because the Americans had warning, but warning was not enough. Because Allied aircraft struck German columns, but aircraft were not enough. Because artillery smashed roads and woods, but artillery needed eyes. Because infantry held hills, but infantry needed time. And in the lanes around Mortain, time was bought by men in small groups, by roadblocks, by anti-tank crews, by tank destroyers, and by that lone Sherman that became a wall when the road had to stay closed. On August 12th, relief finally reached the defenders of Hill 314. The men who came down from that position were exhausted. Many were wounded. Many friends did not come down at all. The cost had been severe. Hundreds were killed or wounded during the stand. The town and hills around Mortain carried the scars of those days. But the German attack had failed. By August 13th, Operation Barbarossa had lost its force. The dream of cutting off Patton's Third Army was gone. The German army in Normandy was now in even greater danger. Soon Allied forces would move toward the encirclement at Falaise. Paris would be liberated later in August 1944. The road out of Normandy would stay open. For the 30th Infantry Division, Mortain became one of its defining battles. Old Hickory had stood under pressure that could have broken a weaker force. The men of the division, together with attached tank destroyer, artillery, engineer, and air support, helped stop one of Hitler's last great attempts to reverse the Normandy campaign. Many years later, the division's stand at Mortain would be honored again, reminding the world that this was not a small footnote. It was a turning point written in fire. So why do archives confirm this lone tank held the line at Mortain? Because the records do not only count tanks destroyed. They show positions held. They show roads blocked. They show attacks slowed. They show how the German advance lost its rhythm in the face of small American stands. They show that in Mortain, courage was measured not only by moving forward, but by refusing to move back. The lone Sherman was never a fairy tale tank. It was not invincible. Its crew was not safe. That is what makes the story stronger, not weaker. Legends often make war look easy. Archives make it human. The archives show fear. They show confusion. They show desperate orders in the night. They show men surrounded on a hill. They show German armor pushing toward a road that could change the campaign. They show American crews firing from hedgerows and roadblocks because there was no better option. And they show that the line held. When people visit Mortain today, the hills are quiet again. The roads no longer shake under tanks. The fields are green. The town is peaceful. A person can stand near Hill 314 and look over the same ground where young men once watched German columns move below. It is hard to imagine the noise, the smoke, and the fear. But history lives in places like this. It waits under the silence. The lesson is simple. Sometimes the fate of a campaign turns on famous generals and large armies. Sometimes it turns on maps, codes, and air power. But sometimes it also turns on a small crew inside a tank, holding a narrow road because someone must. That is why Mortain still matters. It reminds us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is a radio that still works. Sometimes it is a captain keeping hungry men together. Sometimes it is an artillery observer calling fire while surrounded. Sometimes it is one Sherman in a hedge line, firing until the enemy slows down. And when the enemy slows down, history changes. The men at Mortain did not know they were helping shape the end of the Normandy campaign. They did not know that future generations would ask why the archives still remember their stand. They only knew the order, the fear, and the road in front of them. That is the answer. The lone tank held the line because the crew stayed when the road had to be held. The division held because many small stands became one large shield. And Normandy moved forward because Mortain did not fall the way Hitler needed it to fall. If this story helped you see World War II in a new way, leave a like, write your comment below, and subscribe to the channel for more forgotten stories of courage, sacrifice, and history that still speaks today.